Hello, this is Deborah Lehr. I am chairman of the Antiquities Coalition, and we are so delighted to be hosting all of you for what promises to be a very interesting debate on a paper recently issued by the Antiquities Coalition's think tank. The paper is on whether archaeologists have an ethical obligation to report looting. And we are delighted to have an international and very distinguished group of panelists to discuss this. Briefly on the Antiquities Coalition, we are a group with diverse backgrounds from lawyers to former government officials, archaeologists, law enforcement, and more, who've come together to fight against cultural racketeering or the illicit trade in antiquities. Our think tank, which we launched in 2016, has issued 6 papers. These papers provide high-level policy advice around very unique questions in the field of archaeology and how to fight against the illicit trade. We are very fortunate to have several of our previous authors with us: Neil Brody, Sean Faub, Stephen Gallagher, Larry Rothschild, and Rick St. Hilaire, and now Professor Blythe Balestrieri, who drafted this paper. Just a few minutes on the technology, just so that all of you are aware. This debate is being recorded and is also available on Facebook Live. If you would like to submit questions, please do it through the chat function. Just be clear in your question. We're trying to keep them short as we don't have a lot of time and we do have a number of speakers. And please identify your name and your affiliation when asking the question. It's my great honor to be able to introduce our panelists who come from near and far. From Virginia, we have Professor Blythe Balestrieri, who is an associate professor of criminal justice in the Douglas Wilder School of Government at Virginia Commonwealth University. She has a very unique perspective because she combines both her studies as an archaeologist, but also as a criminologist as a lawyer. Luis Jaime Castillo, former Minister of Culture in Peru, who is a professor of archaeology and is also the director of the San Jose de Moro Archaeological Program. Ramadan Badri Hussein, who's coming to us from Germany, and he is the director of the Saqqara Said Tombs Project at the Institute for Near Eastern Studies at the University of Tübingen in Germany. He was previously chief of staff to the Minister of Antiquities in Egypt and has been excavating in Giza, Saqqara, and the Baharia Oasis, and has some very interesting news to share with us about some new developments of one of his major discoveries that he had of a mummification workshop 2 years ago in Saqqara. And last but not least, we have Justice Luigi Marini, who really was one of the champions for this issue of stopping the illicit trade when he was at the United Nations. He served as a senior advisor to the Permanent Mission of Italy, specializing in cultural heritage preservation, and was the man behind a very unique accomplishment, a unanimous vote in support of United Nations Resolution 2347 to condemn the illicit trade in antiquities. And so he is back in Rome, but we're very delighted to have him joining us today to share his perspective. So, Professor, let's start with you. And can you give us, please, just the brief premise of your paper on this very important ethical situation? Are you surprised also, if I can ask, by the findings that you came up with in your paper?
Yes, ma'am. So this paper actually arose out of a study that was initiated just when scholarly interest in site looting among criminologists was starting to take off. There had been some work on collectors and dealers and some work on the transit phase, but there wasn't at the time a whole lot of work on the source end of things. So that's really what sparked my interest in talking to field archaeologists, because, you know, they're working on the very sites of interest to looters, and they're on the front lines. And so this project really took off in 2007, and it's been going on and off ever since. The first part of the study involved an online survey that went to almost 15,000 archaeologists around the world. And I was very excited, I got a very good response rate. We had input from almost 2,400 archaeologists, which is very good. And then I had 662 follow-up interviews that took me the next 6 years to get through. So I think I'm happy with the global representativeness of these findings. I wanted to know what their personal experiences were like and opinions about looting in the area where they've conducted their work. And one of the things that I asked was whether they had ever had any personal experience with looting, whether that meant encountering evidence of looting on a site, interacting with a looter, looting in progress, or being approached by a looter, having some kind of interaction off-site. And I was really quite surprised to find that almost 80% of these respondents said yes, and it wasn't an isolated event. It was on more than one site and on more than one occasion. And so I asked, what do you actually do when that happens? And there were a number of interesting responses. And I would say the vast majority of archaeologists do choose to take some action. They either record and document and photograph the damage, they talk about it with their team. But I was interested to see that there was a significant number of archaeologists who chose not to do anything or chose not to alert the appropriate archaeological authorities or law enforcement. And so that's really where this paper focuses, is why is that actually happening the way it is? Why is non-reporting an issue? And there are some really compelling reasons, some that are more compelling than others. So that was sort of the background for this paper. Great. What would compel an archaeologist to report or not report if archaeologists are sort of seen as these, stewards of cultural heritage and so on and so forth?
Great. Well, thank you. Well, I think that stage sets the stage for us very nicely. And I'd like to turn first to Ramadan. Ramadan, you were at the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities at the time of the Arab Spring, a time when Egypt's museums were under attack and there were reports of significant looting going on, both at known sites, but also illicit excavations taking place. Do you think that, with your experience having witnessed that and now going back and seeing the progress that Egypt has made, that it's acceptable in times of economic stress to forgive looting and not require that archaeologists report it?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you very much for the invitation. I've been, as you mentioned, one of the first people to receive the Antiquities Coalition when you guys came to Egypt, yes, right after the revolution 2011, and that was a fantastic experience for me. And the other thing, I would like to thank Professor Blythe for this interesting paper. In fact, I give this question, the same exact question, to a couple of my friends, archaeologists as well. And I would ask them very straightforward in the past 2 days. If you see looting, would you report it or not? And for all of them, it seems like this is not even a question. You have to report it. So I came from the same exact position, which is you have to report it. But when I read the paper, it gave me more nuance to the situation. It's not really black and white. I understand there is issues when you report it or not. But I still maintain that position. You do need to report it. If you see something, say something. And this is at least the first thing you should do. But we still need to address the concerns of this significant number of archaeologists who decided a no action stance, who decided to look at looting and not reporting it. So we need to understand them. We need to know exactly why they're doing this. It's not just we're judging them. They do have concerns, and these concerns need to be addressed. From the paper I've seen, and I could add another reason, there is definitely, they think that there is a need-driven looting. There is a sympathy behind looting because of the harsh economic situations of the looters and all these things. I think this is a little bit of a naivete on the part of the archaeologists, because the crux of the problem of looting is more deep than this. It's not just people who are impoverished and they need to subsist on looting. This is not the situation. the subsisting looting, the people who do this, are exactly the weakest link in that chain. There's the suppliers, but the big fish in that market is not the looters. It's the collectors and the art market in general. So they're getting, if you're looking economically and sympathize with those people because they're poor, they're not getting their share, their fair share of the pie, if you want to say it this way. So there is no need to really sympathize with them. They're not getting much out of it. So the other thing is, if you think you can be complicit somehow with a criminal offense because this person is poor and they need to eat, how do I guarantee in the next step for you is actually taking part in this? You know, being not just being complicit, you are actually actively taking part in the looting. So this is a bigger issue. The one thing that I was really looking for in the study is to know the age group of this 24% of the looters, of the archaeologists who sympathize with looting. Because I would like to know if this is a cross-generational issue among archaeologists, or it is very particular to a certain generation of archaeologists. Because it would say a lot about our perception of the local communities. We have developed a lot as archaeologists. Our ideological background, where we come from. Archaeologists of the early 1800s, not the archaeologists of the 21st century. We completely grew in our understanding of everything. So that age group thing, I would like to know, is it among the new generation or the older generation of archaeologists? And then we can address that situation. The other thing is, and this is going to be the last thing. The other thing is that I see people who decided to say, I'm taking no action, they distrust the authorities. And this is the bigger issue. This is really the one that needs to be addressed. And the blame here on the local authorities, that they're not building these bridges of trust and not setting the ground for the archaeologists coming in to trust the authorities. So they need to, the local authorities, and I'm saying this about myself when I was in the Ministry of Antiquities, we said we need to take an action to take the initiative at least, and make sure everybody can trust us. When they report something, we will take an action.
So I can go back and look at the original data to answer that question specifically. What I can tell you today is that the typical respondent in this study was an English-speaking male between the ages of 31 and 40, and with anywhere between 10 and 20 years of field experience, specifically with excavation. And it wasn't concentrated in one part of the world or the other. I felt, I have to go back and look at the map again, but their experiences and their non-reporting was pretty well globally distributed. It wasn't concentrated in one area or another. So does that change? Does that, excuse me, does that surprise you at all that the respondents are relatively young? I mean, it may be because this was an online survey, and you know, some people are kind of old school and are not doing online stuff.
It surprises me and not surprise me, because this age group 31 and 40, I think they come with what we call in the US the liberal guilt. They think about local communities who are living around archaeological sites. Those people have been sort of enslaved for so many generations by the early archaeologists, always looked up, down upon. They're not part of the whole archaeological process, the excavation and everything. So I think this younger generation comes from that point of view. Okay, I sympathize too much with them. I feel this liberal guilt that is hanging over my head all the time. I need to just give these people a break. This is pushing it too far. As I said, I don't find a reason to really justify looting at all, and sympathize with that particular action. But I do see a valid point when archaeologists say we don't trust fully the authorities, which is on both sides, the authorities and the archaeologists, because the Both of them should be working together to build trust. So we trust one another. We have one common goal. We're working toward it. And this is the one I would like to address more. But I don't think there is a moral issue there. You should really, it's not a question. You should say something. You talk about it to somebody, you know, but just standing around and not helping, you're actually doing more damage to this. We all go, as archaeologists, we all start with one thing. Excavation, what we do to the archaeological context is we destroy archaeological context. So the damage we're doing is a systematic damage to collect information. And in the process of this systematic damage, we harvest as much information as we can in different forms of data. So the point is the data that we're gathering, the knowledge that we're gathering. So looting, you destroy the site and also you lose knowledge. So you're doing double things. If you look as an archaeologist and you come back from this discipline of what we do is a systematic damage in order to gain knowledge, you let other people do unsystematic damage to lose knowledge. So I think there is no justification of saying nothing or just looking at it. But if you want the ground to be set for a common trust and a mechanism between the local authorities and the archaeologists for reporting and taking action against looting, that is a valid point. This is something we can do, we can discuss and find out what kind of mechanism we can put in place.
Well, that's great. And let's come back to that in the context of recommendations at the end. But I want to go back to one of your earlier points about the need-based looting. And the minister from Peru has a very interesting perspective. I think you have witnessed firsthand the potential of archaeology being used to help drive economics in local communities through the Sustainable Preservation Initiative. And concerns about looting being the benefit of for just a small group versus protection and preservation benefiting potentially a much larger group. And I think your perspective on this would be very useful about how you see the issues around excusing need-based looting.
Yeah, I have a terrible point, but let's start there. I mean, for people living around an archaeological site, and more so for sites that have a potential for tourism, I think a reasonable question is, what am I getting out of this? You know, in the past, when these sites were completely ignored and they would loot them, they might have gained something out of them on a personal level. You know? And now, as some of these sites are being developed, the society in general is profiting from this. So we have hotels, we have restaurants, but there's still the local communities living next to the sites are wondering what are we getting, and they are not part of the economic loop, you know. And as everybody's getting rich out of these sites, now think about Zipan, for instance, people reasonably have a standpoint to say, well, what can we get, you know? So in SPI, in the Sustainable Preservation Initiative, we address this issue not from the standpoint of simply educating people to be aware of how important and great their heritage was, but to try for them to develop means and strategies to make a profit out of this. So if people are coming. Now, that leads us to a very, very clear standpoint, and that is that tourism is not development, not in the local level. Development is selling goods and services. You see, tourism is only an opportunity. If people come and you don't have anything to offer them in terms of services and goods, you are not going to get anything out of it. And you would see all this wealth moving around, you know, and you are not going to get anything out of it. You know? So the programs that we have developed in Peru, more than 15, have been focused on the notion of giving local communities means to take advantage of these opportunities. Okay, so that's one thing. But this issue is a really multidimensional issue. As Ramadan mentioned a minute ago, this is not a black and white situation. There are many aspects. Looting is not a permanent occupation. Usually, poor peasants loot when they need to loot. No? Now, you have your professional looters that loot under the auspices and finance by traffickers and collectors and international chains, etc. I think that we can draw a very clear analogy between drug trafficking and drug consumption and looting. You know, the looting is like the junkie in the street, you see? Yeah. It's the last part of the chain. So are you gonna fight the junkie? Are you gonna fight the consumer? Or are you gonna fight the people that are making the real money, you know, that are infecting the world? You know? And even though you can attack, you know, the local level thing, I mean, it is worthless if you do not attack the trafficking, the international market, and so on and so forth. Because as long as there is a demand, you know, there will be a supply. Now, having said this, and having been a public officer, the issue of whether archaeologists have to report looting or not, I think it's not the point, because government officers, particularly the ones working in the field, know where looting is happening. There are sites that are being looted repeatedly. So nobody has to go in and tell them where looting is happening. Actually, that is something that they take very wrongly. You see? I think that there's a divide between national and foreign archaeologists. Foreign archaeologists working in my country never report looting. It's not part of their business. They don't want to alienate the communities with which they work. No, they don't want to be part of the issue. Local archaeologists have a different ethos. They are protectors of cultural heritage. The problem is that archaeologists are ill-equipped to fight crime, particularly when that crime is an organized system. You see, archaeologists are not trained in criminology. They are not trained in any aspect, you know, and actually they can run into trouble. And we have had people in Peru that have been killed because they assumed that they were, you know, they had to defend this cultural heritage when they had no means, no preparation to do so. Yeah. So you have to understand that if you're going to fight a looter in the very local village level, well, maybe you can do something about it. But if you're going to face an international crime organization, I mean, you really get the troops out. No, you can really get the cavalry in, because that's not going to get you anywhere. No, there's a
here also, if I can just add one thing while you're talking. We've had several questions from our audience about what if it's the government that is looting? What then should an archaeologist be doing? And I think that is a very difficult question.
Well, I've never seen, heard, or suspected or anything like that happening in my country or in my region. No, I've heard of that happening in the Near East, but not around here. I've never seen that. I can find complicity between the government and, let's say, for instance, road building, you know, to destroy sites to move fast, but not looting in the sense, no? Let me go in one little point, in one little direction. And that is that here in Latin America and in many parts of the world, of the developing world, looting is not anymore the issue. That's not the issue. You see, it might have been in the 19th century, in the early 20th century. Today, the biggest problem we have is land encroachment and land trafficking. See, the development of cities and the new technologies used for agriculture that are finally stepping into territories, sites that had never been affected before. That is 99% of our issues regarding archaeological heritage. 1% is looting. 1%, I would say. You see? But because now, rather than destroying one burial or 2 or 10 or 20, we are destroying entire sites. I mean, a bulldozer is coming in and bulldozing tens of hectares and developing that into agricultural land or developing that into cities. You know? So those are the real issues that we are facing. Now, there's a concomitance here because, of course, you destroy, and one of the ways, I mean, to kind of vacate the land is by first looting it and then, you know, passing in the bulldozer. So this is an issue that actually is for us more critical. I mean, the Ministry of Culture in Peru has a department that is involved in protection of cultural heritage. You know? And it's funny because in the past, when we had to face looters, we had to face basically a peasant with a shovel. Today, we have to face lawyers. You see? Basically, a bunch of lawyers that are going to protect, you know, with all the legal schemes that you can imagine, you know, people that encroach and take over land. 1 hectare of land, you know, I mean, if you have 1 hectare of land that is 10,000 square meters, if each meter is worth $10, we have $100,000 there of wealth. No,
Right.
If it's $100 per square meter, you are facing $1 million. And here in Peru, for $1 million, people kill you. No?
Yeah.
So those are the issues that we are facing. You see, and I would combine them because they come side by side.
Mm-hmm.
No? But I think that we also have, because this is a multidimensional situation, we have to adapt to how these things change, in different settings and different moments.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, and I think that's really a very interesting perspective. And I think no doubt requires a different strategy in terms of how to combat it, particularly since often local governments and officials are part of that land reclamation because they are hard pressed for urbanization. So Luigi, you bring a perspective from a different side of the bench, and looking at this from the commission of a crime, is it black and white? Is there a difference, for example, if there's looting going on in Peru or in Egypt from a particular site there versus, for example, in a developed country, if there was looting going on at Notre Dame? Are you going to make a distinction based on need or no need? How do we look and treat looting and the requirements when observing a crime in those contexts?
Well, at first, I want to commend Professor Balestrieri for that paper. She was able to make factual problems clear to a legal expert. So it was amazing to have a so clear picture of the situation. As for your question, no, usually legal experts looked for black and white answers. It doesn't work, because life is not black and white. You always have a gray zone that is very important, and in many situations is the most important zone of life. So that is something that is totally legal, but is not totally unlawful. And it's the most challenging situation, but I think it's also the most interesting and important part. My first point is we have to prevent from working with fragmentation. Usually we look at a problem from different points of view, and these different views are not compared, are not matched. And it's a great mistake. So I'm very happy that the two panelists focus on the chain that is the most important, most difficult situation to address. Poor looters are only the first or the last ring of a chain, but the great part of the chain coming from the field to collectors may be very complex, and usually is managed by professionals and sometimes from criminal groups. And so our approach with the first legal actors, that is poor looters or local looters, must be considered having consideration to the whole chain. If we protect, if we don't report, if we don't work on that, we indirectly protect the chain that comes later. And we prevent authorities from collecting evidence and from collecting important information that should be needed later during investigation, tracing, and possibly bringing looted items back to the communities of provenance. So I think that archaeologists should be really aware of the whole situation, and they must be trained to that. So this comprehensive approach is something requesting a comprehensive response. So I think the paper of Ms. Balestrieri allows us to start thinking about in a wider way, and that's what we are doing today. As for one more point, usually criminal judges, prosecutors are moving with a repressive culture. There is a crime, I must punish. There is a crime, I'm looking for liability. It's fundamental, it has to be done. But I think we must change our mind today. Prosecutor, judges, law enforcement are part of the response. This must be wider, comprehensive. We must move in a more proactive way. So we must look not only to repress and to punish, but also think about how can we put our know-how, our experience, and our work in support of advancing. How can we improve the knowledge of others? How can we work together? We are not just independent workers. We are part of public response. And I think if you have time later, I would like to stress a couple of points of the international legal system that could be very helpful for an international response to the.
Great. Well, I'd like to go back to Blythe. And afterwards, I'm going to have 2 rapid fire questions for you all for yes or no, and to give you a chance to think about those. One will be about whether you think that archaeologists should be held criminally responsible if they don't report their witnessing of looting or destruction of archaeological sites. And the second may go to your point, Luigi, in providing recommendations then on what whether it's the international community or the societies that represent archaeologists, or even going into the world of technology, what can be done to help. So Blythe, going back to you, one, I'm sure you're not surprised by any of the discussion that we've had. You've probably heard a lot of this. I think that the minister, though, raised a very interesting point that often the archaeologists who are leading or participating in some of these excavations actually are not from the country where they're excavating. And did you find a difference between, as the minister was alluding to, those who were from different countries who were willing to report versus the locals reporting?
That's a really good question. If I think back to the data, yes, there was a statistically significant difference between the non-reporting and reporting among archaeologists who live in the area where they work, they're from the area where they work, or they come in from another country or elsewhere. As far as the people who come from another country, what was interesting is that, of course, the basis of their justification for not reporting is, well, who am I to come in and, I don't even live here, I'm not even from here, who am I to come in and, swoop in and police everything and make all these judgments, and also I don't want to alienate these communities, because then that's going to screw up my field permit, and that's going to screw up my publication record, and that's going to screw up my tenure and promotion procedures. So I get all that. As somebody who has been on the tenure hamster wheel, I get it. I absolutely do. But I think it's important to at least take a step back and do some healthy reflection that that's a different kind of exploiting the archaeological record. And I just, to me, it's an ethical question and a value judgment. Archaeologists are very comfortable using criminological language, talking about, cultural heritage is something that needs to be policed, and thieves need to be prosecuted. And I have even read about archaeologists talking about looted sites as crime scenes. So if it is in fact a crime, then if you observe it or evidence of it and you choose to do nothing about it, to me, that is in essence not reporting a crime. So, there's a disconnect there when, nobody questioned that when Mohammed Atta was trying to sell antiquities to finance 9/11, nobody hesitated calling him a criminal. When, Italian mafia was involved in tomb robbing, nobody hesitated about calling them criminals. But then, we stopped short. A lot of archaeologists are uncomfortable and they stop short. No. Some looters are criminals, but other people are victims. And as a criminologist, the interesting irony there is that, one, So now you're saying that you're actually bearing witness to victimization in some way, whether it's victimization by the trade or a terrible economy, whatever it is. And now it's sort of an issue of non-intervention and non-reporting. And the other thing that's sort of ironic that I wish archaeologists kind of sit back and think about is if you say, oh, no, it's okay. They're really not making that much money by selling these things. They're just trying to put food on the table. And then you turn around and say, archaeological heritage is priceless and it shouldn't have commercial value. When you look the other way and don't report when somebody loots because they're poor, that necessarily acknowledges that there's economic value to these items.
Yeah.
And there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point. Sometimes there's a discrepancy on the front end versus the back end. So let's go. One, we're going to try and do a poll. And Tess has put that up on the screen. So for all of you who are listening, watching, please go ahead and vote. And we will announce what the results are at the end. And two, then I'd like to go back to our panelists quickly for the rapid fire to do a yes or no on the question of following up, Blythe. I think you actually laid the groundwork very nicely of then, do you think that archaeologists should be held criminally responsible if they do not report looting? Mr. Minister, let's start with you. Yes or no?
You're on mute, sir.
You're on mute, yeah.
I was saying that I'm a field archaeologist, and of course, we should put every archaeologist in jail if they don't report the minimum transgression to these. This is a little bit extreme because I think that by stating that this is not a black and white issue, we're stating the fact that there is nuance here. No, if you find an underage young boy screening for beads in an archaeological site, and that is like the last thing that happens, no, should you call the police and put this little kid in a reformatory for doing that? I mean, that's one end of the story. No, now if you know of a trafficking and professional looting operation that is destroying the site, should you report it? I think that you should. No, if you know that the site is being bulldozed and you can actually prevent an authority about this, yeah, you should try to help. No, should you put yourself in harm's way by stopping looters armed with guns? I mean, you have to be a little bit stupid to do that. No. But people do it. I mean, some people do it. I mean, so this is not something that you can say. I mean, you can add, I think that most people, I bet you that the answer in this poll is going to be, it depends, you know, and not yes or no. And I think that the dependency is going to be set up by circumstances. No, I think that it is culturally inadequate to say yes or no. I mean, if you walk into a country where looting is not penalized, I mean, should you report it anyhow? So it is a complex issue. And one of the commentaries made in the chat group is that we might want to use some of the strategies that environmental people developed. I mean, try to make communities react in favor of the protection of heritage. And by that, for instance, try to convince people not to buy antiquities that have been looted. And that is attacking this thing from the other side of the equation. So I think that there is many things. Now, should I put an archaeologist in jail? I mean, de facto, by not reporting looting, no, I wouldn't. And I had been a public authority, so I can tell you I wouldn't do that. No. So yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, great. Ramadan?
Well, I always thought looting is an archaeology problem that has multifacets, but I never thought archaeologists not reporting part of it is actually one of the issues. So I wouldn't call archaeologists not reporting looting criminals, but they definitely need to be educated as to the issue of looting and how the business of looting is working and what's the causes of looting and all of this, and who are the looters to start with, and how the market is working. But I wouldn't call them criminals who are not reporting. I would call them archaeologists who need a little bit of education and training and teaching them exactly what's the problem.
Okay. Blythe?
No, I would not be in favor of that. I'm not a big fan of criminalization, especially of inaction. So my answer is a definitive no. I don't think that would be a good idea.
Okay. And Luigi?
Well, from a legal point of view, let me be a little bit technical about that. So we must distinguish international foreign archaeologists from domestic archaeologists. I think, of course, any state can decide what decide to criminalize or not, but usually command by states do not apply to foreign citizens, even they don't commit a crime per se. So, in my opinion, if the archaeologist can be considered a civil servant or a public official due to the legislation of the country, the consequence can be you are publicly charged of a role, you have the duty to report, and I can criminalize your omission or if you don't do so. But if this is not the case, I don't think that any criminalization is a good answer. I agree with others. I think you must educate, you must train, you must experience much more than punish. But of course, if you are a public, you have a public charge, in our legislation in Italy, you are obliged, you are compelled to report any crime you are assisting or any evidence you have, like a medical doctor or like a civil servant. If you assist to a crime, you have a public role. This is important. So it's a complex answer. It's not black and white answer. We must distinguish. But let's be positive more than repressive.
Yeah.
And I would like to also thank those people who are listening. Rob and I will come back one second, who are providing really excellent comments in the chat room. Really appreciate that. And I think Rick St. Hilaire in particular had one about when considering whether archaeologists should or should not report criminal activity, should proposals for archaeological excavation submitted by universities and other research institutions be required to include site security as a component of their proposal, which is a very good point. Robin, sorry.
Yeah, I was just about to say that Judge Luigi has really a very interesting point, making difference between two different kinds of archaeologists. The non-local archaeologists, coming from different country, and the archaeologists on the country who are part of the authorities. Those ones in particular who are running the sites and part of the organization, like in Egypt, the Ministry of Antiquities, for example, if we have an archaeologist working with us and he sees looting and not doing anything, that's your job. That's your job to actually prevent the looting. So watching it and not reporting it, that's a crime. That's some action. That's something you will be reprimanded administratively and also criminally for it. So we have to make this distinction between two different kinds of archaeologists. The ones who are foreign coming into, I wouldn't call them criminals if they see something and not reporting it. But the local authorities, no, that's your job to report it.
Really excellent distinction. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left, and I know we have some questions too from the audience. So I'd like to go, if we could, briefly through recommendations and what you would recommend that could help archaeologists in these situations. And I think we've really come up with some very interesting shades in this discussion of whether they're foreign or local, whether they're part of the government as excavators or not, and even if it's young people who are opportunistic or it's part of organized crime. So Mr. Minister, shall we start with you? I know you have actually been on the forefront of using technology to protect sites and had some very interesting views about technology. I don't know if that's part of your recommendation, but feel free to share what you've been doing on that front also. think you're on mute again, Mr. Minister.
Okay, this looks like a late moche beautiful ceramics with a beautiful decoration, but it's not. It's an artisan produced high quality object that is even better than anything that you can find in the real art market. We don't need to buy. I mean, this is an SPI product. This is something that we develop with a community, in the SPI framework. We don't need to buy stuff. We can get really great stuff. If you go to Chinese museums, you get great reproductions. And that is one way to actually cut down on the looting, because if you have a supply of things you want to get, and that is high quality, that is one response. Now, the issue of looting and encroachment and trafficking in my country has achieved such a proportion that this is not something we can tackle by 1 or 2 or 100 people going into the sites and looking what's going on. We need to look at it from a more technological point of view. Either we use satellites or we use drones to monitor regions, not sites, not specific looting holes, but in entire sites. And the technology is there these days. You can actually use satellites, and there are several projects that have been doing that around the world. And you can use drones for something more immediate. What you need is fresh images, so that you can actually come down and, look at these sites. So the Minister of Culture in Peru was developing a satellite and drone office that actually was in charge of monitoring sites. If you can get images of what's happening today and tomorrow and in several days, you will be there almost real time knowing what's happening. And because what I said before, that we know where looting is happening, we know which are the threatened sites. We don't have to look at 100,000 sites. We can look at the sites that are more critical. And that allows us to have a perspective that goes beyond what a witness would have seen. We are doing that. We are doing a little bit of that in regions like Nazca and Cusco. We're using drones intensively to monitor sites and to assess change. Something that using technology can be done not only visually, but also in terms of volume. You can look at a site, compare a three-dimensional model with another one and see if there's a little change in the kind of, the amount, three-dimensional amount of matter, let's say, in a site that has been changed. So these new techniques are probably the front line of what needs to be done. The old-fashioned walking into the site and looking around, believe me, in a big site that is impossible and makes no sense. Looters know where you're gonna go. They know how to avoid you. So of course, that is not the way to do things. But it's very hard to avoid in an open site, the satellite looking at you or the drone flying and recording and then producing a three-dimensional model of what's going on. So that is the way to approach this issue as we are facing it growing around the world.
Great, thank you. Ramadan?
As I started saying that there are concerns for archaeologists who decide not to report looting when they see it. The main concern for them is economic factor. Then there's their safety, personal safety, and the connection to the community. And then this distrust of the local authorities who are running the whole show. So I think the first one about the economic factor behind looting, we should tell them, okay, looting, economically speaking, wrong. Your perception is wrong. The looters are not getting what you think they're getting. Scholarly speaking, looting is wrong. Morally speaking, looting is wrong. You should be doing something. So what you do something is, now it comes with a bigger issue. The authorities should just erase that distrust that is going around in the archaeological community with archaeologists, thinking, okay, local authorities are complicit, they're part of the whole chain, and if I tell them something, they'll not do anything. So now the burden on the local authorities to build this trust. And I would say we need a mechanism from local authorities that encourages archaeologists to report something and they stay anonymous. You don't have to mention their names, so they don't jeopardize their connection to the local communities, they don't put their life in risk. And also using the, we are in a digital age, using websites for reporting looting that has to be monitored and initiated by local authorities. So I would say we really need this mechanism to put in place by the local authorities that encourages archaeologists to do something, to say something when they see looting. And
Yeah,
also
that's
we
an
need to
excellent
educate.
point. And we had our people in our audience had made the point about it needs to be more transparent about who to report to.
Right. And the other thing is education about the whole looting issue for this younger generation of archaeologists. It's not what you think. It's not economically driven. It's not this.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we want to have a few points from the audience. Blythe and Luigi, we just asked for your recommendations, somewhat concise.
Well, to be brief, first, I think it's important that archaeologists are not left alone in front of their choices. It should be something to be foreseen before any excavation starts and any campaign starts. So my point is, this has been a very, very useful dialogue. We had different points. I should be very curious to the list of questions posed by people listening to us. It should be very helpful for us to continue this work. My suggestion is, why don't we think about a further work to be done in a cooperative way among all of us? We can share more other consideration, because I think if we work together, legal experts, archaeologists, public experts, and people working on the ground too, and if we go together, we can have a list of critical points, difficulties, opportunities, and we can prepare something, a positive paper to be used from all sides, for judges, prosecutors, law enforcement, archaeologists, and public administration, because I consider the importance of the contract and authorization that are issued before an excavation starts or a campaign starts. This paper should contain all important points, including liability, what to be done in case of looting, you meet some looters or you have evidence of looting, what kind of security we can provide you, what kind of consequences we can foresee. If we work together, we can advance a lot in awareness, education, training, and experience on the ground. This is my suggestion. I think no one can work alone on this issue. It's too complex to articulate it. And I should be very keen to continue the discussion in the future.
Great.
It's very interesting. I think we can be helpful.
Okay, Blythe?
So one of the other findings that emerged in this study was a lot of uncertainty. What do I do? Whom do I tell? What do I do? Where do I go? If I encounter this, or I meet somebody, or you know, somebody approaches me off site and tries to sell me something that I think is looted, what do I do about that? And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty out there that goes all the way back to the classroom. I haven't done an exhaustive content analysis, but I did take sort of a cursory look at some of the top, most popularly assigned intro to archaeology textbooks. And there's discussion about ethics in there, but a lot of them don't say anything about looting. And, you know, I think the dialogue is probably changing these days in school, but I think that that's really where it starts. I'm a criminologist. I am not especially a fan of making things punitive and you know, trying to make punishments more harsh or more severe. I don't think I'm alone when I say that it really goes back to training, education, and negotiation, and also persuasion, because it's about, in my view, it's about creating a culture of compliance where buyers aren't going to buy, sellers aren't going to sell, and looters aren't going to loot. And so I would say it goes back to education and training and persuasion. And that starts in the classroom.
Great. Well, we have some really excellent points that have been raised, and I'm just going to go through a couple of them because we had quite a few questions submitted. I would say Peter Tomba had a very good point about the idea of paying a living wage to people in some of these communities is a way to stop looting from occurring. And Kate Fitzgibbons had a note about the importance of documenting collections, not just in major national museums, but in smaller museums. And so it's important to have a baseline of what's already in circulation to be able to track it. I think these are two very interesting and important points. There were several made about creating clarity in the standards. For example, both who to report to, but at the same time, the police have a certain standard that they're expecting when you're reporting looting. And so how do you work with law enforcement to make sure that it's more than sometimes just saying we saw looting? How does it meet the standard that they need to be able to take action? And how do we make sure also that any hotline is linked to law enforcement so that when there is reports, there's some follow-up that's done. It's not just calling in and nobody's really listening to or taking action on it. And, we also had a few people who disagreed with the panel. Brian Rose was one of them, who believes that when you're witnessing looting, it's essentially the commission of a major crime, and they should be held accountable. We had quite a few actually who weighed in and felt that the answer to whether they should go to jail was a yes. So I think we've had a broad range of perspectives on this. Blythe, I'd like to, in the last few minutes, give you the last word on this. We really appreciate your very thought-provoking paper. I think this discussion has been very broad-ranging and could continue on for probably another hour or so, and particularly based on the feedback that we've been getting from those who are listening with so many interesting opinions. We'll see if we can capture those somehow and circulate them to the group. Blythe, before you have the last word, and we thank our amazing panel, Tess, did you want to let us know the results of the poll?
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so 85% actually said yes, archaeologists do have an ethical obligation to report looting. 2% said no, and 15% said it depends. And perhaps a follow-up question with Blythe is, does that surprise you?
Sorry, say again, you cut out for a second.
85 yes, 2% no, and 15% it depends. Do those results surprise you?
No, not particularly. Not particularly. Can I just add something to that, though? I think it's important for us to make a distinction between reporting looting and reporting looters. I realize that sometimes that can be a bit of an ethical dilemma for some people in the fields, like how do I protect confidentiality if I'm getting information from my informants who also happen to be looters? And I get that there's that ethical protocol to think about as well. But I think that there's something substantively different about reporting looting and looters. In terms of the ethical obligation, no, that doesn't particularly surprise me. It would surprise me if it made a difference between foreign archaeologists and local archaeologists. I would be interested to know if they felt differently about that obligation.
Great. And then Blythe, in conclusion, do you have any?
I'm sorry, you just cut out.
Before we over. Okay.
Okay.
Just as we start to conclude here, we're at the end of the hour. If you'd like anyone like one last comment before we finish? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining. We have people from around the globe. It's been so interesting to see the questions coming in and where you are. We really appreciate you joining us, and to our panel also international. It's been amazing. Blythe, thank you again for such a thought-provoking paper, and we really appreciate all our panelists and joining us for such a great discussion. Many thanks. Great.
Thank you.